All right, let's get to our guest interview. Mike Murray is the Chief Security Officer at Lookout. For 2 decades, Mike has focused on high-end security research, first as a researcher and penetration tester, and then building and leading teams of highly skilled security professionals. He previously led product development security at GE Healthcare, where he built a global team to secure the healthcare Internet of Things. Prior to that, he co-founded the Hacker Academy and Mad Security and has held leadership positions at companies including Encircle Network Security, Liberty Mutual Insurance, and NeoHapsis. Mike,
wow,
welcome.
That's a name I haven't heard in a long time. NeoHapsis. You're old like me.
Yeah, I'm totally old. Thanks for having me, guys. It's so good to be on here again. It's been a while.
All right, so let's talk post-perimeter security. You and I had a really fun kind of prep call for this discussion because I think you and I think a lot alike about the problem that is coming to the security industry.
And it was that as we move to a more modern world, the idea that assets are going to be in fixed locations that you can stick firewalls in front of starts to become a more difficult proposition. And we see that. My favorite illustration of that is actually Microsoft Exchange. You know, my whole career, and from the time of NT4 on, the one of the main functions of most enterprise level IT organizations was to run the Exchange server. In the last 5 years, I don't know of any company, Fortune 10 or not, that is not moving away from having their own on-prem Exchange server towards Office 365. And suddenly, all the things that you built around your network to protect against attacks against that Exchange server, you know, your network IDS, your corporate firewall, your WAF, like all of this infrastructure was designed to protect those assets inside your network. And suddenly you're moving all those assets to someone else's network and you no longer have any ability to control them. And that's one simple example that doesn't take into account that the client platform has shifted largely from originally fixed assets on the desktop towards, you know, sort of less fixed assets on the laptop, towards an entirely new platform where when I talk to Lookout's customers, what they're telling me is, you know, 70 to 80% of their logins on their corporate AD infrastructure are now coming from a mobile device, either iOS or Android, because everybody's accessing their info from phones and iPads much more than they're pulling out their laptop. As everyone's moved to this new platform that moves around, that switches networks, you know, at a whim. I mean, I could be on our corporate Wi-Fi with my phone, and with one button click, suddenly I'm in the same spot, but I'm on a different network. I mean, you said the problem that's coming. I think this problem's here. And I think if you grew up believing that network controls were the way that you controlled all security functions, as the last 5 to 10 years have happened, that thinking and that framework is really becoming obsolete really quickly.
Yep, Mike, I agree. And it really shined and allowed me to see that this past week, right? When I was at the conference, I got across the various conferences where if the presenter was presenting something that was even 4 or 5 years old in terms of a network security design, the audience was pretty vocal to folks like myself in various venues to say, I didn't really enjoy that talk because it was 5 years old, right? So much so that they're presenting probably what's relevant perhaps in some of their networks today. But to many of us, we're like, 5 years ago is like so 5 years ago, right? And it's totally different now.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, and this is another whole conversation, security always lives at the front end of the technology lifecycle. And if all the security issues have to live at the front end of the technology lifecycle, if you're living with 5-year-old solutions, you're missing out on what the security lifecycle looks like today and what the threat environment looks like today. Most of us grew up at a time when every attack started with a port scan. Even today, the curriculum of that certification focuses almost entirely on attacking open server ports and network-based attacks.
And so, to your point, the network is not the way we should think about it, right? We've talked is that the network attacks will shift to the new perimeter, which is really a combination of the application and the user. And when we get through this transformation, I think there's only 3 things that survive: app, user, data controls. Because that's where everything will be centralized. The network, to your point, will be completely abstracted away. Most of our endpoints will even be abstracted away because everything we've deployed completely vanishes from underneath of us.
Yeah, and I think you can see that change happening even in the network standards, right? And the three of us grew up kind of at the same time, so I'm pretty confident that I can say this. When we were growing up, largely layers 1 and 2 of the OSI model are abstracted enough away that I don't think very many of us ever really considered layer 1 and 2 security as problems we had to handle. I think what we're going to see over the next couple of years is layers 3, 4, and 5 start to go away as well. You can see that most interestingly in the HTTP 3 standard. And this is going to be sort of arcane and technical for a moment, but HTTP 3 is really interesting because for the entire time that I have been in this industry, HTTP is run over TCP port 80 and HTTPS is run over TCP port 443, right? If you go look at the HTTP 3 standard, they're talking about re-implementing HTTP to run over UDP. That is such a radical change that if you did that 15 years ago, it would have broken every firewall and everything pretty much. The entire internet would have exploded. The common phrase that I keep hearing is identity is the new perimeter. And I think the most important thing to realize is that and I said this at RSA, I said that I think it's become trite to say that. There's 40 booths at RSA that have that slogan on them, but no one's thinking about what that means from the attacker perspective. The attackers today are not thinking about network control evasion. They're thinking about evasion of other controls. So for example, if I want on your iPhone, I've got to get you to exploit, I've basically got to exploit one of those client-side vulnerabilities. So I've got to get you to do something. If you look at all the serious, highly resourced attackers on mobile, they're attacking through what we would call phishing, but every one of them is using a different channel, right? It's messages, it's SMS, it's WhatsApp, WeChat, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. They're going everywhere where your email controls aren't. The same way that we tried to evade firewalls and network IDSs 15 years ago. And so when I hear the phrase identity is the new perimeter, or that idea of app user data, you have to realize the attackers already realize this, and they're already starting to go where the controls are weakest. And it's happening globally. We see it pretty much everywhere.
What I'm going to attack is the application and the user, because to get into your hotel room in certain magical resorts, you can unlock your door from your phone via the app, right? That's a feature that they've implemented. That completely changes the attack surface today and how you go about, accomplishing your goals as an attacker today. Now it's completely different. It's like, well, if the functionality has moved to the application that the user uses, that's where attackers are going to migrate to as well.
Exactly. You got it. And if I get your password and username for that app, then I can just go download myself a copy. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, and I can unlock your door without any of the network stuff that you just talked about.
Yeah, and I think that's why identity is an important aspect of it, but it's not everything, right? You need that application protection. Those have to be done in conjunction with each other.
Yeah, that's why I do.
Oh, go ahead, man.
I was going to say, Mike, I said, that's why I don't think identity by itself necessarily is the new perimeter. I think it's that combination of the app and the identity. It's that combination that becomes that kind of new perimeter, because the way most people interact with other systems is not only you logging in, but then it's through that application, especially mobile applications, right? I still, to this day, do not trust mobile banking apps. I'm just scared to death that somebody gets access to my bank account. I don't do it. But that's what we're talking about is if somebody takes over that application on your phone and perpetrates you as a user, that attack vector and how you protect against is very different than what we're doing today.
Yeah, 100%. But I think what I think is funny about this is a lot of it goes back to stuff we all know, right? Microsoft more than 10 years ago said something to the effect of, if someone else has root on your computer, it's not your computer anymore. And if that device is not well protected, if you don't have a good sense of the integrity of that device against attackers, all the things you do on it are suspect. I mean, people like to talk about the security of Face ID and the security of, before that, Touch ID and fingerprint readers and stuff like that. All of that is great, but if someone malicious has rooted the device, it doesn't matter how cryptographically secure the proofs are around the assessment of your biometric identity, because the device is in somebody else's hands effectively. You're up against adversaries from 2019 who know all the things that adversaries in 2019 know. So if my two-factor token is on here and it can be compromised, you've just removed all the factors. I type my password in here, you know my username, and you have my two-factor token all at once, right? So this becomes one factor unless you secure it in advance.
Right.
Yeah, it's important. There's a whole subsection now of our industry that is focused on multi-factor authentication and proving your identity. And in my briefings with many of these companies, Mike, I bring up just that. Like, what if I lose control of my phone? What is the recourse? And many of them do have recourse, but the user still has to notice that something's not right on their phone, or someone protecting the app has to notice that there's something going on with my identity, right?
Yeah, and good luck with that. When you're talking about the attackers who are attacking mobile devices, largely they are the more resourced attackers. They're the ones that don't make dumb mistakes.
Right.
And can I approach this problem with fresh eyes? Can I look at my network and say, okay, I no longer run any of my own servers. All that stuff's in the cloud. All of my clients move around all the time. And yet I built my whole world on the idea that I have comprehensive information about all of these systems. And yet, unless you are running a really strong mobile threat defense product, you're not getting any endpoint intelligence from these devices largely. And suddenly you go from, okay, I have 100,000 users, so I have 100,000 laptops feeding me intelligence, to my users are largely leaving their laptops on their desk and not taking them with them. And if they're being attacked on a device I have no visibility into, and I'm going dark on my whole network. Oh, instead of, I'm going to pick on vendors just because I'm using them as an example. Don't take this as reflective of my opinion about any individual vendor. But I'm going to spend a ton of time thinking about, should I upgrade from McAfee and Symantec to CrowdStrike and Cylance? That's an interesting question, but it's a much more interesting question to me to say, okay, I've got coverage on my traditional assets. What can I do in my environment to give me coverage on this set of assets that are outside of my control, that are outside of the way I've always done things? And how does my entire strategy have to shift? But that is the reality we live in today. And if you're not willing to challenge those assumptions and the things that got you here, you're going to have a really hard time living in this reality.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the challenge, right? Is I got mobile devices, I've got users, I've got these new applications that are servicing up my new users. And if I don't have visibility into that new stuff, even though I still have a data center or I still have on-premise devices, I'm blind to a big portion of what I used to be able to see on the network, and really get that visibility back so that they can detect and identify when an attack has happened.
Yeah, I heard a great statistic the other day, and I don't remember which analyst firm this was from, but that the Windows endpoint market is still like a $6 billion market or something to that effect, whereas the protect Android and iOS market is a few $100 million market, even though when you look at your network, your users have more phones connecting to your assets than you have laptops connecting to your assets. It's a strange set of cognitive dissonance. It's like when I talk to people about container security. I mean, I think container security is a fascinating place where you've effectively abstracted away the entire network for anything on the same Kubernetes cluster. Everything's talking without ever leaving to a network. And people aren't even conceiving of some of those problems and the attack patterns that come along with them yet. But they're already running everybody I know is running to Kubernetes in the cloud. And so we're running to the technology. I think it was Paul that said it earlier about needing to align with where the technologists are going. We really need to go look at what that cutting edge stuff is and derive entirely new security patterns for it, because I think the attackers are ahead of us on this one.
I mean, you're right. The network, even Kubernetes is going to be abstracted away. That's what AWS Fargate does, right? Pretty soon, you're not even going to own the orchestration layer.
Right, exactly. And if you're not thinking about that problem, your users are going and putting key corporate assets there, and you are blind to that. And if you're not willing to say, oh, wow, maybe, yet another network DLP solution doesn't solve this problem.
Yep, that's exactly right. Oh, the challenges we all get to face in the years to come. Mike, thank you for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
No, thank you guys for having me. It's always a blast. I always love hanging out with you guys.